I guess I was always interested in a lot of different disciplines and scientific methods. So I studied molecular biomedicine and worked in the lab. And I started to ask a lot of questions that I couldn't really answer with these methods, right? Because I was interested in why are we doing this? What can we actually extrapolate from this kind of lab research? And that's actually how I got into philosophy of science and philosophy of medicine. And then I kind of like encountered the same again, that I sort of started to ask questions that necessitated a more historical approach. And yeah, I guess I'm continuously meandering between disciplines, guided very much by the questions that I ask. I'm always very interested in like these different disciplinary perspectives, but also in this peer exchange. So that's in a way kind of like curiosity driven, but also from yeah, kind of a vision of a community in science, right? That is more also directed towards collective sustaining something and less competition. And on the other side, I guess I'm also driven by anger because I just think that a lot of things are not organized in a way that really is has a positive vision of human and a positive vision of science and a positive vision of society. And so I think if we want to make a change there, then we need to do something. Organizations like ALEA or also the Junge Akademie or the Global Young Academy, all these networks are really important because they give a room to an academic community that is in a way neutral, right? Because they do not pay their members, you're not employed there. And that opens up a certain way of acting, right? That is in the scientific sphere, but that is not immediately connected to like your tenure or your narrow academic community. So I think it really is important as kind of like this field where you interact with other academics on issues that are of concern to all of us, but where you're not only like within your little niche. On the other hand, it's really, I think, a wonderful place to collectively think about what needs to be changed and how we can go forward and how we can, what are the reactions to like the different crises that we have at the moment, but also like the more like long-term structural issues that we have to deal with. One is indeed this like vision of science as a very competitive field where it's about publish or perish. And I do think that there are really alternatives to this idea. I think that's a very neoliberal idea of living together. And what I was always really astonished by is that, I mean, it's, I think, a crucial feature of science that you do critical thinking. So there are like a lot of super clever people out there that are very good critical thinkers. And nonetheless, they kind of like often present this idea of a competitive scientific system as like the only possible solution. And that's something where I think it's really important to open up that discussion. And that's also something that we like now want to go forward with ALEA to look how research assessment might also be able to really include more dimensions, and with that also maybe foster some change in what gets acknowledged as yeah, a scientific virtue or a virtue for the community. So it's important for me to be on the ALEA board to get more representation for a diversity of viewpoints, including those of young and mid-career researchers. Because I think more diverse voices will always give you more alternatives, and that's a good thing, right? Because then you can see how complex a problem is, and you can think about different solutions, right? So I think diversity and inclusion are very important in themselves, right? Then the inclusion of young and mid-career scholars is important because a lot of the things that are discussed in science policy, so kind of like the political decision making about science, is immediately effective on early and mid-career scholars, right? And so it's particularly important because you cannot just talk about them and about what you do to their lives and careers. You should also talk with them, right? But then there's also this issue of science-based policy advice. And there, I think it's very important also to hear people who are from like a very active research environment, right? And I think the things are connected because in the way that research careers are like assessed at the moment, it's actually not necessarily beneficial for you to spend time doing other things than your research in your niche. And that's why I think it's so important that we have to, in a way, broaden the field. It cannot just be that there are like select like younger people who are doing this, because then you just repeat the problem. But it has to be on a structural level. It has to be on a structural level that you really motivate people to get engaged, that you open the doors, that you give them opportunities, and that you positively assess that and include that in research assessment, if you have research assessment, what we do. One thing that a lot of women encounter, but not only women, of course, is that they think like that they are challenged on a personal basis, right? And that creates this kind of like doubt, right? That they are challenged as academic, right? And it's not always easy to immediately connect them to gender, right? It's often not so obvious. And it might only be in hindsight that you think, actually, it might have played a role that I was a young woman, right? So I think what is really important is that you have a group of people that you can trust, that you have peers and mentors that you can talk with, also about these things, like, that was a bit of an awkward comment. What did you think about that? Right? It's just really important. I do think that the research environment really matters a lot. So, I mean, what I just said with, well, it's important to have mentors. It's important to look for encouraging peers. For me, this is not just an individual thing. I think it is also a structural one in that you create research environments that are like positive, that are healthy, right? Where you can flourish in a way. And that's something that I think is often invisible labor. So often women are actually expected to create these kind of research environments, to think about the birthdays of everyone and to ask people, how are you? How's your family doing? Right? Actually, this is a lot of work, and it's important work. It's super important that you actually know how people are with that you work with, right? But this should be acknowledged. It should be acknowledged that it matters that you have a good research environment. Be self-confident. It's okay if you have doubts, but don't think that that's necessarily the case. And it's also okay if you have a different opinion, right? I guess that's something that you just need to learn. Then search for people who empower you and encourage you. I think that's really important because yeah, it will always be the case that if you're doing scientific work, I guess it's the same like when you're doing creative work. There are always these phases where you just think it's everything doesn't make sense what you're doing. I think it's just part of the creative process that you have this radical self-questioning, and then you need people who are kind to you, who help you over this.